Good morning, friends, and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. Presently, we are discussing interviews, and today I am going to discuss the second part of the types of interview. In the previous lecture, we gave a brief overview of some of the types of interviews, and in this lecture, we shall actually discuss in depth some other types of interviews which you come across in your professional life. Now, before we go into the depth of the discussion, let us take a quote by Lawrence Bossidy, a businessman and an author, who says, "Nothing we do is more important than hiring and developing people. At the end of the day, you bet on people and not on strategies." The meaning that actually comes out of this quote is that from every interview, we actually want to select people who can be the best fit in the organizations. As regards to strategies, strategies will vary from one organization to the other, but much depends upon the attitude, upon the disposition, upon some of the skills of the people that we are going to recruit. Now, let us try to understand some crucial facts about interviews. One thing that is very important in terms of interview is that even though it is a form of conversation between the interviewer and the interviewee, actually this is one opportunity for both of them, and it provides them with a chance to capitalize on their needs and goals. While the interviewer looks for the people who can cater to their needs, the interviewee tries to make himself a fit or to make himself come true to the expectations of the interviewer. The two parties involved attempt to speculate, negotiate, and benefit from the resources of the other. We have already discussed in our lecture on negotiations, and we can take a cue from that lecture and we'll find that in interviews also, in order to be successful, we have to negotiate. Now, employees, the people who are recruited, they benefit from the job security and opportunity offered by the company. Whatever sort of job you are looking for, but every interviewee or a prospective employee wants a sort of job security from any organization. And companies try to attempt, because it is only at the initial level, they try to find out in the prospective candidate what and in which manner they can harvest from their human resource to the fullest possibility. Companies also try, and companies also endeavor through different sorts of interview to hire skilled people for future development. That's very important. So, these are some of the crucial facts about interviews. Now, you might be thinking, because in the previous lecture also we talked about some of the types of interviews, but then you might also be thinking as to what could be the medium of interviews. Nowadays, with changing times, the mediums of interviews are also being changed. So, interviews can occur in various contexts and forms, primarily because of different demands required by the hiring platforms. Sometimes the interviews can be conducted online, but then in many organizations, there are several rounds of interviews, as I have told you earlier. So, the common practice, despite all these forms of interviews, is to hire a person mostly on the basis of personal interviews, which we can call face to face interviews, because on many occasions it has been found that these online interviews, telephonic interviews, teleconferencing interviews, they finally some way or the other do not provide people enough opportunities to judge a person from the point or from the expectation that actually they require. That is why in a face to face interview, which has actually become very integral for selection purposes, we find that despite all sorts of new ways of developing interview modules and mediums, a personal interview still appears to be the best of all interviews. The changes in the present day world and also in the global lifestyle and communication, there has actually been a rise in the medium of exchanges, including interview, and that can be possible in different ways. There have been newer varieties of interviews and modified versions of interviews, just in order to cater to the needs both of the interviewer and the interviewees. It has often been seen that they do not want to conduct personal interviews for all the people who appear to be eligible. Rather, in order to cut costs, in order to save time and energy, what they do is they have several online methodologies and personal interview becomes the final one. And most of you might be expecting what could be or what are the expectations of job interviews. Of course, all these interviews that we are talking about or discussing are some way or the other related to jobs, but when we come to real job interviews, we find that there are certain differences. Now, what are they? In job interviews, interviewers often aim at recruiting suitable candidates for their company or for their organization, whatever discipline it is. And here, the interviewees actually get a chance to showcase their suitability through their abilities, through their experience, and also through their skill sets. Now, if you remember well, in the previous lecture, we have talked about structured and unstructured interviews. Most of the job interviews where personal presence of the candidates becomes a must, there the requirement is just like a structured interview, which actually leads to several rounds as per the candidates or interviewees' performance. Now, in such a sort of interviews, especially job interviews, you will find that interviewers actually hold the key control during such interviews. Now, much depends upon the interviewers. Of course, there is a little bit of a scope for the interviews also to bring or to some way or the other draw the attention of the interviewers towards their own field, I mean in the field or in the skill sets that they feel themselves confident of. Now, a little bit of discussion also about traditional interviews. Most of the time, as we have been saying, that finally it is the personal interview that has to play a key role in the final selection. So, let us talk a little bit about traditional interview. And in this regard, let us take a quote by Young, who says, "The interview proper," look at the words, "the interview proper." I mean, it is not just like the screening interview. It is not just like shortlisting of CVs and resumes and all. But then when the interview per se is in the truest manner, so the interview proper does not begin until a considerable degree of rapport has been established. There are different ways of creating or establishing rapport. For example, if it is the first round is the screening one, Then after the screening, there may be second round. So in certain cases, there may be psychological tests. In certain cases, there may be written tests. Based upon all these rounds, and when the candidates come triumphant in all these rounds, then they perhaps come for the traditional interview. So the most important touchstone is probably the mutual discovery of common experiences. Now, what do we mean? Actually, as an organization, we have certain expectations. And when all these rounds are over, now it's going to be the final round in the form of face-to-face interviews, where the touchstone is probably the mutual discovery, what the interviewers expect and what the interviewee can cater to. Now, the idea of establishing a mutual rapport, which can be common in most of the interviews, but then actually we can always say that if we have tested them properly, so we can find that establishing a healthy relationship between the company and the employee, that is actually the prime motto. Of course, you cannot establish a proper rapport unless and until both the company and the employee have been in touch for some time. So, rapport building comes only at the later stage of selection process with a limited number of shortlisted candidates. You cannot, even as an interviewer, you cannot establish rapport with all the people who have applied for a particular job. So, that is why after all these shortlisting rounds and screening rounds are over, now towards the final stage only, when there has been much of rigor and the candidate has already overcome all these rigors, now is the final test where the establishment of the rapport can really be practiced. For that matter, it is personal interviews which are conducted during the final stages of the recruitment process, and most of the time this is face to face. We have also seen that under certain crucial circumstances, when a person wants to appear at an interview in an online mode, many companies also see to it that even after some amount of time, these candidates can be called for a personal interview. Now, there are other sorts of interview also that all of us must be familiar with. And since we have been talking about online interviews, so the need is to talk about computer assisted interview process. In short or an abbreviated form, we can call it CAI, computer assisted interviewing. Now, in this form of interview, computerized automation actually appears to have challenged the traditional interview methods. Now, there are certain limitations also. You cannot ensure that it's foolproof. Sometimes there are certain impediments also because of the technical glitches at times. Fine, we are not able to judge the candidate properly. In this regard, Singleton and Straits, in one of their research papers, they elucidate the birth of computer assisted interviewing and its further extension, which actually occurred during the 1970s. Now, the genesis or the beginning of this computer aid during the interview process was first observed in survey interviewing. Now, see, so long as it is practiced for surveys, for market research and all, this can be proper, but when it comes to the proper recruitment, we find that it had certain limitations. So, this computer assisted interviewing was later applied, and even nowadays it is being applied for recruitment purposes also. And as I said, it actually helps many organizations save their time, save their energy, and also save their revenue by carrying out computer assisted interviews. Now, there can be several types of computer assisted interviews, and that also we should make a mention of here. And what are they? The very first is KP, CAPI. This is an abbreviated form which actually stands for computer assisted personal interviewing. Now, you have already realized, and many of you also might have come across this personal interview, but then based or assisted by computers. So, in this sort of interview, an interviewer or a team of interviewers conduct a face-to-face interview. It's very much like a face-to-face interview with the help of a laptop or tablet to record answers. Maybe in such a situation, even though it is very challenging to judge, so the answers are recorded on a laptop or a computer. Of course, there are certain limitations. Here, you are not only restricted by time in case the number of applicants is too many, but then you cannot go into the depth of the candidate's knowledge and all. Then there is another, that is CATI, and this sort of interview is computer assisted telephone interview. Now, at least in personal interview which is assisted by computers, you can see the person. It is actually face to face, but in KT, it is simply on telephone. An interview is conducted by telephone with a computerized questionnaire given to the respondent. The respondents are given the questionnaire, which are actually computerized, and the candidate is simply supposed to respond to that. Maybe in this form of interview also, everything is recorded. And then the last one, that is CASI, which stands for computer assisted self administered interviewing. Now, in this form of interview, respondents attend a computerized self questionnaire and there is no interviewer here. Fine? Without the intervention of an interviewer. Now, this is very challenging, because if it is self administered and self questionnaire, now it of course may become very difficult for the other people or for the other party to decide the fate or decide the result. Now, another sort of interview is evaluation interview. Actually, such a sort of interview is very professional in nature, and here one thing that can be eliminated is the bias shown by the interviewer. So, the elimination of the bias of the interviewer with the structured quality of evaluation is conducted in this sort of interview. Of course, in such a form of interview, the interviewees, I mean the candidates, they answer questions which will be evaluated further by using an interview rubric. There may be a sheet, and in the sheet there may be certain columns, certain criteria. So, the final judgment or the result will be decided on the basis of the candidate's answer or response to the questions by using an interview rubric. Now, this interview rubric is also known as interview matrix, and here every organization will have some amount of variation in terms of the way they put questions. They may also use a sort of hiring scorecard. We can have a look at such a sort of matrix in the, yes, here. Now, let us have a look at the interview rubric, where you can find the criteria, and then there are rating, and then there are comments. Now, in this sort of interview, you will find that the criteria mentioned is, the very first is well prepared for the interview, and there are certain certain qualities or certain characteristics, whether the candidate was punctual, whether the candidate was well groomed, did he respond to the questions properly, and then the rating is done. The rating may be on the basis of 10 or 20 or whatsoever, depending upon and varying upon from one organization to another. And then if there are some crucial comments, there is another box where the comments can be written. Now here also it is a systematic process where the next criteria is whether the candidate is well experienced and is he relevant for the job that she has applied for. Then the candidate's awareness, and the candidate's awareness of what? DEI policy. Today we actually need people who can have diverse sets of skills. So, diversity, then equity and inclusion. We will find later on when we go into the depth of the discussion of how when we are going to face the interview, there are certain questions through which they also want to find out whether the person is of inclusive nature or is a person of such a nature who simply wants to work in isolation whatsoever. So, all these are very important. Then comes interpersonal skills. How is the candidate's behavior in terms of interpersonal skills? Again, there can be another criteria, whether the candidate has the ability of written and spoken communication, written and verbal communication. Is the candidate having the adaptability skills? So, these are the criteria which actually can be contained in an interview rubric. So, the interviewer, when this has come, maybe this was just circulated, when this has come, then there are comments also, and on the basis of this there can be an overall score which can finally decide the fate of the prospective employees who are going to be recruited. Now, there is another category, that is situational or behavioral interview. As the name itself suggests, during evaluation interview, the candidate's behavior is analyzed. Behavior of what? I mean, if you have a look at the candidate's CV, you can come to have a lot of information about the candidate's past behavior, candidate's knowledge, candidate's skills in conflicting situation, in different situations, in odd situations, how the candidate behaved. So, one can have a knowledge of all this. Unlike an evaluation interview where the interrogation is on past, situational interview focuses on the future role. Based on the candidate's behavior, the interviewers can foresee and can think whether he will be a fit for the future development of this organization. In such an interview, the candidate's behavior is used as a guide, as I said. Sometimes for any hypothetical situation, the interviewer may offer also a hypothetical situation, and in such situations it is suggested to decode the question and answer using the star method. Now, what is this star method? The star method, actually all the words of the star they have got some attributes and characteristics. What is that? Situation. S stands for situation, then T for task, A for action, and R for result. Now, in such a situation, the candidate can, of course, while he describes the situation, he can say, in my last role as lead designer, my team was short-staffed and facing a significant backlog of work. The account managers were setting unrealistic deadlines, which was causing stress for my team and affecting morale. So, through this, you have provided them a situation. And what would be the action that, and based on the action, then task. So, what task? Explain the task that you did. Say, for example, you as a team leader, so you not only ensured that the team could meet the deadlines, but also you communicated with other departments in order to keep the team motivated. Then the action, What action was taken? So a committee was set up, fine, a creative request was sent, and then the candidate provided scheduled meetings with account managers to discuss the team's bandwidth and share progress reports, and then finally the result. By doing all these things, what happened, what materialized, what resulted? So by providing transparency into my team's process and settling better expectations with account managers, we're able to reprioritize the design team's to-do list and then shorten our average project timeline by 2 days. So this actually gives the recruiter or the interviewers a peep into your initiative that you could take during difficult times. Now for this, how to prepare? Think about situations from previous jobs as a candidate, and then also list your skills. Then you can also provide instances that you did, and then you can determine the results. Then at times you can also come across persuasive interview. Now what are these persuasive interviews? As the term persuasion itself says, that in such a situation, maybe there is a conflict between two employees, two teams, fine, two units. So in such a situation, the interview provides a space for a candidate to sell themselves as a potential and valuable candidate by persuading the interviewers. Fine. You are actually trying to convince them. However, this sort of interview refers to the selling ability or the convincing ability, as I said. The candidate has to demonstrate how they can sell a product or a policy or idea, and the interviewers can assess the candidate's worth, the candidate's selling skills, and the candidate's marketing expertise in terms of marketing job. For example, they may or you may be asked, how can you sell this chalk? How can you sell this chip? How can you sell this pen? And they provide you a sort of condition or a situation, and you have to explain them. Next, a very challenging interview is stress interview. What are you supposed to do during a stress interview? Now, such a situation is very tense because the interviewers may create a situation. Maybe at times they may ask some very unacceptable questions. Sometimes they can create such a situation where there can be no answer. Sometimes they can be silent for a long time. Sometimes they can create a situation where nobody speaks anything, and after that then they ask questions. So at times very threatening questions are also asked. Sometimes they create such a situation where you appear like being provoked and they want to see your reaction. So such a sort of stress interview can help to assess a candidate's stance, action or response in certain areas. For example, heavy workload, if you do not get any time to relax and you are tied from 9 to 9, how would you react? Fine. Then sometimes they can also create a situation like when there is a tight deadline. Sometimes there are oppositions from several quarters, and then sometimes even though you are working to the best of your abilities, but you are being criticized throughout. So how can you? Now such questions are often very difficult to be answered, and in stress interviews such questions become a must because they are so structured to measure the candidate's efficacy in order to see how a candidate can handle conflicting and difficult situations. Now, if one can go for a job interview, sometimes or the other, because people nowadays are very ambitious and the opportunities are galore, everyone wants to enhance one's destiny and one's pocket, find the package. So at times you may change your jobs, and before you change your jobs, what sort of interview you go for is exit interviews. Many organizations see to it that they conduct exit interviews of the candidates who are leaving them. So while exit interviews are conducted mainly while hiring employees, the practice of interviewing also occurs when an employee resigns. In most of the cases, we conduct interviews to hire people, but in certain cases, when somebody leaves, some employee resigns, then also we can conduct an exit interview. It is actually a survey which is meant simply to understand what were the experiences of the candidate in this organization and where are the areas of improvement, what sort of ambience can be better in order to retain an employee. In such a sort of interview, the candidates are expected to provide a proper and honest feedback. It may actually be conducted in multiple forms, from face to telephonic interview, and even at times in the form of a paper interview. Now, another sort of interview can be a sort of audition interview, as the term itself says, audition. I mean, when an actor goes for the real show, but before that he goes for a sort of audition. Now, such a sort of interview aims at assessing a candidate in a real job situation, how the candidate will react, how the candidate will behave, and in such a sort of interview, the tasks are given which the candidates are expected to handle in future. In many educational institutes also, you might have come across that before they finally call you for the personal interview, they can provide you a sort of demonstrative interview where you can be asked to deliver a talk, or where you can be asked to teach a lesson or a piece or whatsoever. I mean, this may vary differing from one discipline to another, from one organization to another. Now, here is one chance for those candidates who feel that they are not so strong in terms of their communication. But if the job requires a sort of experimentation and hands-on experience, now this sort of interview provides them an edge where they can showcase their skills for certain jobs which are computer related, which are graphic designing, painting, which are data analysis, data conducting. So in such jobs, not much is expected of communication skills. Rather, what is expected is of the candidate's competence in that field. Now, what should a candidate do in such a situation? Candidates actually, before going for such a test or interview, must revise their specific set of skills mentioned in their resume before they go to attend such a sort of interview. Now, another category of interview is a tag team interview. Now, what is a tag team interview? Imagine a candidate has been asked to meet somebody or one interviewer, but when the candidate goes there, there are some more people also. Now, it is an unexpected surprise for him. So, in such a sort of interview, the candidate meets more than 4 or 5 persons at the same time, simultaneously. Now, what is the purpose behind such a sort of interview? The purpose is to select a person who can handle many persons at a time, isn't it? Especially for administrative positions, especially for such jobs where you have to deal with people and many people at the same time. So, such a sort of tag team interview is very effective. Now, this sort of interview allows the interviewers to evaluate the candidate's ability to judge the different people in the organization. Now, what should a candidate do during such an interview? Candidates must ensure proper eye contact and see to it that every member is responded to. No member of this team should be ignored. Fine, that actually can help him stand the test of time and make a candidate successful. And the last round and the last category of interview that we are going to talk about is the Fermi interview. Now, what is this Fermi interview? This is actually one of the most challenging ones, and it was actually devised by one of the faculty members named Enrico Fermi of the University of Chicago. What was so special about this sort of interview? It is actually named after the person Enrico Fermi. It is actually meant to seek logical answers of impossible and hypothetical questions. I mean, sometimes you can find that the questions are very impossible and it's very difficult to answer such questions. Maybe if somebody asks you, how long will you take to drive to the moon or to the Mars? Fine. Can you really think of an answer instantly? So, such a sort of interview evaluates the candidate's mathematical and analytical abilities, but even though that is very challenging. Answers in such interviews actually depend upon the candidate's cool temperament. As a candidate, you have to maintain your cool. You also should display your reasoning ability, and you also should show your awareness. At times you may be witty also, and you can show your alertness to questions. Now, even though such a sort of interview is very challenging, but this way of judging a candidate, while it may appear very difficult, but then it can allow interviewers or recruiters to get the right sort of person who can work even in a situation where nothing is possible, where everything is impossible. My dear friends, having discussed all these forms of interviews, there can be many other forms of interviews also which we might not have discussed. Say, for example, mealtime interview. People may take it for a fun. But then even in a mealtime interview also, because somebody or the interviewer has called you for a meal, the key control lies in the person who has invited you. So you have to maintain your cool and you have to be guided by, please try to have a sort of observation of the way the other person eats. Don't show your hunger or don't show your impatience to eat so many things at a time. Rather, this mealtime interview is simply a pretext, and since it is in an informal manner, the interviewer actually wants to gaze into your personal habits, your behavior, and also your decorum. My dear friends, interview of any sort can be very challenging, though. One must always keep a cool. One must always think that if one interview fails, another interview might be knocking on our doors. So, having discussed all these, the time has now come to wind up this talk, but not without taking a beautiful quote by one of the greatest philosophers named Soren Kierkegaard, who says, life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forwards. What is the meaning? The meaning is one always has chances to look at our past mistakes or our shortcomings, but one must always try to learn from the lapses of the past, and one must always try to look forward so that one can do better and one can get the sort of job in order to prove that he is the best fit and he is the person required to be recruited by any organization which is looking for not only people with values, attitudes, mannerisms, and skills. With this, let me end this talk and wish you all the best for your interviews. Thank you very much.